So, after seeing an overwhelming amount of posts over the last year or so regarding first-timers, train hopping, or traveling, I figured I'd write this. Train hopping is a very romantic idea. You know, screw everything. Screw any obligations. Screw the world. Screw where we're going. Let's just get on a train and see where life takes us. Right? Well, first of all, I'm not here to be the killer of anyone's dreams or aspirations. But I've never been in the mood to travel by train, so you're probably not going to get some advice from me. But if you go on YouTube and see what these people do, then yeah, they're the guys you want to go to. Don't get me wrong, it's not really that hard. But at the same time, you have to have some common sense and be able to use whatever equipment you've got. For example, a lot of you are, probably, thrill seekers looking to throw caution to the wind, or a bunch of middle-class kids that don't know what they're doing. You do realize the type of people who hop trains are face-tatted, nothing-to-live-for alcoholic drug addicts, looking for dumb kids to get a new pack or whatever. Ever see a bunch of degenerate-looking folk with several dogs and a 40 asking for their change outside of 7-Eleven? The people you decide to blatantly ignore. That's the people you now have to sleep under the bridge with, if you decide to train hop. Somehow get thrown into a drunken night without getting robbed, or worse, crap kicked out of you, or, if we're being truthful, killed. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but the whole traveling community in America is not the most accepting community out there, to put it lightly. Quite frankly, it's the complete opposite. Don't get me wrong, there's many awesome people within it, but for the most part it's a cesspool of dumb decisions. You might think to yourself, is this really what you want to do with your life? I'll tell you firsthand, the majority of people will consider you, if you start train hopping, as a second-rate citizen. Even fast food workers would agree, and I don't think I'm going to take that chance anytime soon, and hopefully you'd agree with me on that. It is the only way I can put it in distinction. And once you start leaving everything behind, you'll start getting heat from a crap ton of people. Yeah, it's practically God's way of giving you a wedgie. Take my friend Chris as a prime example. He's been train hopping his entire life, going from place to place, practically thrill-seeking just for the fun of it. To him, train hopping is a passion, an obsession. He can't go a day without traveling around the world, seeing sights and wonders Mother Earth has in store for him. As for me, I never liked to train hop. I just go ghost hunting with the rest of my college friends. Usually, Chris would post his images on Facebook, and I'd see the places he'd gone to via Locomotive. I'd comment him back, but he'd just get too enthralled on his expeditions that, for some stupid reason, he'd go and do what hobos tend to do. Draw a bunch of symbols that say stuff like, a triangle with hands, signifying that the homeowner has a gun. A horizontal zigzag, signifying a barking dog. A circle of 2 parallel arrows, meaning get out fast, as hobos are not welcome in the area. A cat, signifying that a kind lady lives there. Chris was into the whole hobo idea. He's been what they call a road kid, a young hobo who apprentices himself to an older hobo in order to learn the ways of the road. He's always been on the road, and likes to use trains to get to places, and to come home from his travels. Days went by, and things died down since he's been sick with the flu. It was allergy season, and he came back from Atlanta, Georgia, coughing and sniffling. I bought him some medicine, and as the days progressed, his health starts to come back. And of course, he asked me if I want to go train hopping with him. I'm usually the one who bails him out of prison because of his actions, specifically trespassing on public property. I refused, as usual, and he went on his merry way to hop aboard another train. He went with his equipment and a couple of snacks and refreshments for the trip to Nevada. I waited for days on the front porch with my best buds. I waited for ages for Chris to come back from his trip. I waited until the sun was cracking through the trees, and then I waited until that night, sitting on my porch step, feigning off sleep deprivation to see my friend come back. Hell, I even waited at my job at the local Burger King as a cashier. Chris did not come back. Not until next year. Fog had rolled in at that point, and it was getting darker, the night painting the sky a navy blue. Dragging over last year proved futile, and I started to get worried that I'd need to leave and find more provisions to last me a couple of months. I couldn't leave Chris up here, lost in Nevada, hot and probably starving to the point of becoming a skeleton. The thought that he might be waiting out there for me to find him and bring him back home was a distressing thought. I was packing the bag that hung on the coat rack next to the door with what I'd need to probably fly to St. Louis and drag his ass back home. I figured tomorrow would be the last day before I'd go there and scold him for being so stupid. Thankfully, Chris came back before I'd even finished the train of thought. I saw him from the window, walking down the street a few dozen feet away from the house. Normally, I'd hear him walking up to the doorway and knock on the door a few times, waiting patiently for me to open the door. But this was different. For a moment, I thought it might be a stranger, but the outline of his body in the wisps of the thick, low-lying clouds was unmistakable. Still, despite myself, I hesitated. There was something different about his body language. I stared out of the window for a few more moments before reason overcame my gut instinct. Chris could be hurt, I thought, or worse. I flung open the door, but he didn't come in right away. Instead, he stood there, watching me intently, and when he didn't move, I whistled to him. "Chris!" I called him towards the house. "What's up, buddy?" The way he moved was different. He moved like a zombie. His head was bowed to the ground, but his expression never changed. He didn't seem like his energetic self. The only way I could describe the look he gave me was exhausted, like he'd been awake for months. I mean, I don't blame him for being tired. He had been traveling by train ever since the idea first came into his brain. He didn't wait for me to open the door for him. He just barged in and went straight to bed. Just like that. No handshakes, no high fives, not even a simple greeting. Went straight to the guest room to lie down like he owned the place. I thought this was a bit rude for Chris to just barge in here and go lay in bed, but he had been train hopping ever since I last saw him, so I thought this was the perfect time for him to rest from his adventures. But there was something about Chris's appearance that was off. Far from a distance, he looked normal, but from close up, his facial features looked different. It was as if I was looking at somebody else. I went to the guest room to ask Chris if he was okay, but he didn't speak at all. He didn't even look at me as he laid there and faced the wall. He just nodded his head slightly up and down. I then asked him if he wanted something to eat, since he had been traveling by train, but he slightly shook his head no. I was now starting to get suspicious. This wasn't like Chris. He'd usually come home from traveling, eat his supper, and take a shower before watching Bar Rescue on Spike TV. He'd never go to bed early. I made the dumb decision to blow this off and go on with my day, hoping that Chris would wake up from his nap. I could have sworn I heard him walk in the night. The sound of footsteps against the carpeted floor coming up to the door of my bedroom, but they were slow and deliberate. They weren't like the quickness of Chris realizing I'd gone to bed and coming to pull his usual pranks whenever I'd go to sleep. I heard the noise stop outside of my bedroom, but I didn't hear him whispering to his video camera like usual, though I thought nothing of it and fell into a deep sleep. When I woke in the morning, I figured it must have been a dream. Chris was still sitting in bed where I'd left him the night before. It was as though he didn't move a muscle the entire night, and when I said good morning, he didn't so much as look at me. He did follow me into the kitchen, but he paused at the doorway when I put his food down on the table and filled his glass up with milk. Once again, he moved weirdly as he slowly made his way toward me. There was a nagging feeling that something was off-putting about the way he looked that day. It was like he had gotten a little skinnier and paler, even overnight. Chris gave me that look again, like when he was walking to the door the night before. He didn't come into the kitchen. I figured he must have been hungry, being out in Arizona for so long. But he eyed me like he was waiting for me to come a little closer, rather than touch the eggs and toast. It goes without saying, but after a few moments of a staring contest between me and my rugged friend, I asked, "Chris, are you okay?" Like last night, he nodded slightly, but not a single word. I didn't want to move closer to my friend to leave the kitchen door, but this was Chris, and the most damage he'd ever done was eat or drink from the garbage bin. Sure enough, as I passed him, he turned and his eyes met mine, but he didn't move towards me. When I left for work the next day, I just casually looked over at one of the TVs above one of the customers, and what I saw made every fiber of my being tremble and quake. On the TV was a news broadcast, and the English subtitles read the following. "We have breaking news. A few weeks ago in Nevada, there had been an incident around the United States Air Force facility known as Area 51. Reports state that something had allegedly broken out of the facility and made its way across the desert and came across a young man named Christopher Ray Smith, a traveling train hopper from Richmond, Virginia, and mauled him to death before stealing his traveling equipment and wallet. Police found his body outside the Las Vegas area around the nearby highway, stripped from his clothing. The workers in Area 51 recommended our crew to keep quiet about the whole situation, but we have managed to take snapshots of the murder in question, as you can see here." The scene changed in seconds to actual photos of my best friend's murdered corpse, laying on the desert ground, ass naked, and blood all over the place. Whatever killed Christopher Smith has never been found and or identified, so if you see anyone or anything that has Christopher's items around, please contact your local authorities immediately. Now, for the weather. I cried for most of the way home, hands clenching the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't believe that. Chris, I'm so sorry. The next day was when everything went to hell. It must have been close to 4 or 5 in the morning when I heard it. The sound of singing. It was in Chris's voice as he, or it, sang his favorite song, Poor Wayfaring Stranger. I broke into a cold sweat as I realized that whoever butchered Chris, stole his clothes and took his stuff, could have very well broken into my house. The door to my room didn't make a sound as I slowly opened it. Thankfully. I waited a moment, listening to someone singing that song for a few more seconds before I dared to poke my head from around the doorframe to get a better look at whoever it was that could have hurt Chris. The outside door was open. It was outside on the front porch. Whatever it was that had impersonated my friend, it was singing in my friend's voice. I shit you not, it looked directly at me and said, "My ego," in the most ungodly voice I'd ever heard. I closed the door just as softly as I'd opened it. I don't know how long I waited with my back pressed up against the door. I knew I'd left my gun in the bag on the coat rack. I know I didn't sleep. I waited until I saw the sun break over the horizon, and then I waited some more, until it must have been midday and I finally got the balls to open the door again and make a break for the car. I wouldn't die in that place. Chris was gone, and the door was open wide still. His food was untouched, but the fridge was open, and all the meat was gone. I didn't bother packing my stuff. I just threw my bag over my shoulder, made my way to the Toyota as fast as I could, and turned on the ignition. I can't describe the feeling that overcame me as I realized that I'd have to confess to the police about what had happened. I mean, who's going to believe me that an alien had killed my friend and took his identity? They'd think me a psycho. I don't think I could cope with the knowledge that whatever I allowed in my house, whatever disemboweled that man, could have done the same to others in the past. I made my way down the road as fast as I could without veering off onto a sidewalk. I felt relief wash over me, thinking I was safe. But the knot in my stomach tightened each time I thought about what had happened. I called my friends, my mum, my dad, and told them about my friend being dead. And they responded to me with the same thing. They saw it on the news. I pulled up to their driveway. I'd never felt that much agony in my entire life. I told them everything. But I didn't describe to them about the alien monster thing impersonating Chris, because, again, who would believe me? I wish I could leave off of this with a positive note. I wish I could tell you that I found Chris at home unscathed. I wish I could tell you that that was the end of it, a traumatizing experience that I'll get over with in time. Last night, I found it hard to sleep. I kept replaying the entirety of my friend's visit in my head. I figured I wouldn't be sleeping for a while and laid there, listening to the wind through my open window. I could have sworn I heard the singing I used to hear Chris make, coming from outside of my parents' house. If you go train hopping with your friends, I advise that you don't let them out of your sight for too long. What comes back might not be your friend at all.